Okay, this next video is a little bit more complex. I'm going to show you how to add parameters to your subroutines so that you can make use of sprites that you've created and make them a bit more useful, a little bit more generic. So let's have a look at the ball sprite I've got. At the minute, this ball, if we look at the subroutine for it, we create the sprite, it's got the blue ball, not bothered about that, but the position is always in the center and the velocity is always 100 pixels per second horizontally and 200 vertically. Now what we can do is if we add parameters up here, and this is this first line of the sprite subroutine, if we add parameters for position and velocity, we can change how it is displayed on screen. This makes it super flexible, and it means that you can use the same definition for a sprite to create multiple sprites with different attributes. So we're going to say float x, float y, we're going to say float vx and float vy. Okay, now that's made this moan and say, oh, it doesn't take no arguments. That's fine, because we haven't got any in between those two parentheses. Okay, so I need to now change this and say, right, well, I want this sprite to start at 100, so that's somewhere near the top left hand corner, and I want it to go left 100 pixels per second, and I want it to go vertically upwards 50 pixels per second. Okay, so you can see it's actually telling me what the parameters are there. So it's saying float x, float y, float vx and float vy. Okay, now in my subroutine I can make use of these parameters. So it's just data that is given to my subroutine for me to use. So I can replace screen size.center with x and the y position with y and the velocity with vx and the velocity with vy. So these numbers that I've presented here are passed using these names, and then we can use them inside our subroutine. So if we run our subroutine again, so we've made that sprite, and every time I run it I could make it different if I wanted to. Okay, it killed on first touch, so let's just change that and make that wrap. So change the limit box action to wrap. Run it again. Right, and you might think, well, so what? That's not very useful, but I'll just show you two things now that's going to make it super useful. Right, I'm going to create another ball. I'm going to say ball sprite, and I'm going to give it 400 is its X starting X position, 300 is its Y. I'm going to give it 100 as its X pixels per second and 100 as its Y pixels per second. Go again, run it, and I should have two sprites on screen, but I've only had to do one extra line of code. This is where parameters are very useful. What I could also do is I could generate a random number. Okay, so let's create a random number. So we say random r equals new random. So that creates a random number generator for us. Same thing, I just called it r for simplicity. And what I can do, instead of having fixed velocities, I can say r dot next, and I can say give us a velocity of minus 100 and 100. And I'm going to do the same for the y. I'm going to say r dot next minus 100 comma 100. Okay, I'll leave the other one fixed. So when I run it this time, I'll get one sprite doing what I always wanted it to do, the second one, and then the first one it's going to have different velocities. So it went slightly forward and up. Let's run it again. See that again. Now again you might think, so what? So it's moving slightly slowly. So what? Right, I'm going to get rid of that line. I'm going to make a loop. And I'm going to say for int I equals 0, I is less than 100, I plus plus. Okay, I'm going to put a brace on either top and bottom of that ball sprite line, and I'm going to run it. that's going to make 100 sprites. So I've used 5 lines of code and I'm going to create 100 ball sprites. And they're all moving independently. The game engine's doing all that work for you. They're all wrapping, it's keeping track of it, it's moving them. Okay. Sort of useful. You'll see some other videos later on that show you a bit more useful stuff than that. But parameters are very good. It means you can position sprites dynamically rather than setting it. Obviously some things like where insert corner appears and title screen appears, they're going to be fixed. But for character based sprites or non-player character sprites, it's important to be able to position them wherever we want. So when you shoot a bullet, you want your bullet to shoot from where your ship is. Okay? Otherwise it'd be stupid if it came from the same spot on the screen all the time. Okay, so that's parameters. Get used to it. One last thing I'll show you though, and something you'll have to do for your documentation. We need comments here to say what all these parameters are. So if we move our cursor just above private void ball sprite and go ///, it'll create a summary block. So we can say create a ball sprite, and we then say what each of the parameters are. So we can say starting X position of sprite, starting Y position, a bit boring but that's what you have to do, of sprite, starting X velocity, oops, spelt it wrong, comments don't matter too much as long as you don't lose your meaning, starting Y velocity. So we run that. It does that job for us. Okay, now why were these comments useful? Well, when I go over and create a ball sprite, I'll just delete this, don't do it on yours, but when I do that, each one of these parameters, as I get to it, it displays on screen that text I put in. Okay, so that's there to help you. So as I move to the next one, the Y, tells me what the Y is. Next one, starting X velocity, starting Y velocity. Very, very, very handy. One last thing I'll show in this video, we're going to add another parameter to pick a different ball. So we're going to say int ball number. I'm going to call it as a parameter. Obviously this has gone wrong, so I'm going to now put a random number into there so we get different balls. So next, and it goes from 0 to, let's just do 15, because I know there's at least 15 balls in there. Okay, so I'm randomly picking a different ball colour. Let's run it and see what it does. Ah, they're all blue. I must have made a mistake. So let's go back to the code. So I've got my ball number, picked a random number, but when I specify which ball I want, I've still left it as 1. So if I replace that 1 with ball number, that'll pick a different ball each time. This video's ended up longer than I thought, but hey. And there you go, lots of different colour balls. Although whether black is actually a colour and white is actually a colour is a debate. Looks like Smartyland. Okay, so parameters. Mega useful. Don't, under any circumstances, copy and make loads of sprite subroutines where all that changes is a couple of values. Use parameters. That is these lines here is a lot easier than typing that line out 100 times. That would be insane.